Alright, we are here going to make the extra tangy sourdough. To get started, it's about 9 in the morning. I'm trying to start so that I have plenty of time in the day to complete it. I just took the starter out of the fridge. The first step is to prep the starter. So here it is. This is what it looks like. It's cold right now, but that's okay. This is what it looks like underneath. So like a little bubbly, it's still alive, it has action. It's a little bit gray on the top, that's totally fine. If it's black, that's bad, that means that it's molded, you have to throw it away. I'm gonna start by taking all of the starter out and measuring it out into a container on the scale under grams. Then what I like to do is just put the crock back on the scale, tear it out back to 0 grams. For the recipe, we are going to need 227 grams of starter. And that means that I'm gonna make more starter than I usually do when I am just keeping it without baking anything. So I want to have at least 50 grams left over when I'm prepping the starter. So that way, at the end, I have enough to just put back in the fridge and then enough to bake with. I'm gonna start with 75 grams of the starter. All right, and then to that, I'm going to add 150 grams of, this is just lukewarm water. Don't use cold water because then it won't, the warmer water will perk up the starter a little bit more since we had it in the fridge. So I'm just gonna add 150. And then I'm gonna add 150 of flour. This is half and half whole wheat and all-purpose flour that I've already pre-mixed and weighed previously. So let's clear that out again. So you'll be adding equal parts flour and water to this. Right, that's good. Then, so that should be about 375 grams total, which will give us plenty to use in our recipe and to keep for the next time. So actually you're gonna mix it up relatively well just so that there's not a lot of like dry spots, but you don't want to like be developing a lot of gluten or something, so don't be standing here beating it for, you know, several minutes or anything, but just making sure that there's no like big patches of flour. So that's good. I just wipe it off with clean hands, of course. And then let it rest until it gets nice and has big bubbles, so it's really light and airy, and it's just about doubled in size. So make sure that after it doubles, it doesn't fall yet, because that means that it's past the peak of its ripening. So I'm gonna check back. It's probably gonna take about 3 to 4 hours depending on how active your starter is. If you haven't baked with it in a while or haven't fed it in a while, it might take a little bit longer. And yeah, so we're gonna check back at probably about 12:30. All right, so I'm gonna let this rest either outside on the countertop if it's pretty warm where you are baking. Otherwise, what I like to do is put it in the oven with the light on, because that makes it about 80 degrees, which is the perfect proofing temperature for it. So it is, you can tell it's doubled in size. It's very fluffy, jiggly, it has a lot of air in it. If you go like this, you should be able to see lots of big bubbles. If it looks very foamy at the top, that means that it's past its peak. You should feed it a little bit more, wait a little bit. So what we're going to do now is we're going to combine the initial starter, water and flour, let that rest, and then we'll stick it in the fridge. first, let us 0 to scale. I have a big proofing 6-liter, 6-quart tub. It's really nice because you can see how much it rises. It's easy to work in. I'm going to start with 227 grams of the starter. Look at that, 227 on that. Then add 340 grams of, this is lukewarm water again. It's fine if it's a little bit over. You can't really take water out of it. And then 362 grams of all-purpose flour. Okay, that's fine. Then beat it vigorously for a minute. I have here a bread whisk. This helps to break up the dough nicely. So it's going to be a little bit liquidy, but that's because we're going to be adding more flour tomorrow. So you just want to get all of the flour mixed in really well. It's not going to create a lot of gluten at this stage, but it just gets everything nicely mixed. All right, it's been about a minute. It's very, it's smooth, a little bit of a few chunks, but it looks pretty good. Don't need to over mix it or anything. So what we'll do now is cover it. You can use a wet cloth or some plastic wrap or whatever lid comes with the container. And then let this rest at either room temp or in your proofing oven for 4 hours. All right, and you can take the remaining starter and put it in the fridge for next time. All right. So now it has been 4 hours since we mixed in the flour and the water. Your mixture should look very liquidy with some bubbles. So this is the consistency, pretty wet, really sticky. You don't need to do anything or mix it, just keep it covered and rest it in your fridge overnight for 12 hours. It's about 5 o'clock now. We started at about 9 a.m. this morning. So you can rest it for more than 12 hours. So we'll probably start back up at 8 a.m. tomorrow. All right, it's 8 a.m. The bread has been resting in the fridge for about 15 hours. So I'm going to get it out. And what we're going to do first is add the remaining flour, 241 grams, and 2.5 teaspoons of salt. Your bread shouldn't have risen very much. It's probably still a little bubbly, and it should have a little bit of a sour smell to it. That's the sourdough. All right, I'm going to add 241 grams of flour, just right on top. And 2.5 teaspoons of salt. I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna do it right into here. 1, 2.5. You don't have to weigh that. All right, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically just punch the flour down with my hand, kind of like this, to try to mix in some of the flour. You can also take the edges and pull them over like this, and eventually just keep mixing it in. Then we're going to be turning it out onto a clean surface, and we're going to be kneading it. Okay, I've mixed it together into a relatively shaggy dough. The flour isn't completely incorporated yet, that's fine. So I'm dumping it out onto the counter, and be sure to get all of the remaining
flour as much as you can out of the container. We're gonna be still using the container to do the proofing, so it's okay if there's a little bit left. It will eventually get incorporated into the flour. So dump that out. Side. Okay, so I'm going to start with the kneading. The bread is still pretty cold from the fridge, so if as you're going, it is a little bit difficult to work with, you can just let it rest like this, just how it is for a minute, 2 minutes, and it'll warm up a little bit, but it will also warm up from the heat of your hands. So I'm just going to be pressing. It's okay that it's a little sticky on your hands. It's gonna happen. Just gently work in the remaining flour. What I like to do is press forward with both of my palms and then give it a little turn, fold it back, and then press back out with my palms. Also, sometimes I just press the whole thing forward with my palms, like back and forth. You're going to be completing this back and forth, turning, kneading for about 10 minutes until it's really smooth, very elastic. It bounces back with your finger. Right now it doesn't bounce back, but you need to develop the gluten, and then it looks good. This is where the dough is at after about 3 minutes of kneading. It's cohesive, it's not sticking to the table, but it's still pretty rough, a bit lumpy, so we're gonna keep going. All right, halfway into kneading, the dough is pretty smooth. You can see it's feeling a little warmer, a little stickier, but it's not sticking to the counter when I knead it. But when I push it out, you can see it's still a little bit, still cracks a little bit. There's still some sharp peaks. It's not as smooth, has a good stretch. It's starting to bounce back a little bit, so we're gonna keep going. Okay, the dough, I've been kneading it for 10 minutes now, and it's looking really good. It's really shiny, keeps its shape. There's not much dimples. It's pretty sticky, but if you pick it up fast, it won't stick to the table. It bounces back quite a bit. Not too much, but you know, it's gluten developed. I'm going to put it right back into our container, cover it up. Now what's next is we're going to do a set of stretches as it rests. I'm going to proof it in my oven with the light on, and if it gets too warm, you can just crack the window or crack the door of your oven. Then every hour for 5 hours or 4 turns, going to be doing some stretches. So I'll show you when we get there. Set a timer for 1 hour and we'll be right back. Okay, I'm taking the bread out of the proofing area for its first set of stretches. It's filled up the bottom of the container, which is nice. It's a little bit sticky. What you want to do is take the corner of the side of the bread dough and stretch it all the way up without tearing and fold to the other side. Then move along the edges of the container and keep going until you get all the way around. It might take 4 or 5 stretches, just all the way over without ripping the dough. And that's it. Put the lid back on and put it back in your proofing area. Okay, I've done 3 stretches and it's been proofing for 4 hours. This is the last stretch. I'm going to show you how much more elastic it's gotten. It has a bit of a rise to it, so it's a bit more poofy, has some more air. Just take it on all sides. We'll stick it back in for the last hour. So it's been about 5 hours. If you started at 8 a.m., then it should be around 1:15 to 1:30, depending on how long it takes you to do your stretches and the kneading, etc. So now after 5 hours and 4 sets of stretches of the dough, I'm going to take it out. I've also grabbed some parchment paper as well as my dough scraper. And what you want to do is take a little bit of flour and sprinkle it on your work surface so that it doesn't stick to your work surface. You can also put some on your hands. Also, water works on your hands if you want to get it off. Take the dough out of your, this is how mine looks. Take it out of your container, right onto that surface here. That's good. And what we're gonna do now is we're going to shape the dough. So what you wanna do is, if you at this point want to make 2 loaves, you can split it in half with your dough scraper. If you want, it makes it a lot easier if you just wet this, and then it won't stick to the dough, it'll slide apart. I'm going to make 1 big loaf, and I'm going to cook it in the in my Dutch oven, which will be great, but I want to do it in just 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shape it into 1 big ball. So I'm going to take the top 2 pieces here, fold and press them into the middle, and then I'll take the bottom ones, press it in, and then 1 final one, do a big stretch over like that. Then what I want to do, I might take a little bit more flour on my hands. I'm going to flip it over and then sort of shape it into a taut ball by kind of like pressing in with your hands, but also swirling it around. That will shape it into a nice ball. You might see some air bubbles. That's totally fine. Don't pop them or anything. You want to keep the outside of the dough nice and tight. All right, that looks good. You could also use your dough scraper and scrape it like this into the middle, especially if it's sticking to your surface. But what we'll do now is place this dough onto your parchment paper. That'll make it really easy to move in the future. Looks good. What I'm gonna do next is we're gonna let it sit out so that I can have 1 last proof. This is the final proof after your shaping. Take some press and seal or some other type of grease, cling wrap. Give it a good spray and just set this over the top of it. That makes it so that it will release later. You don't press it down too much or anything. Just let it lie, and that way it can be you can stay moist. With the dough covered, we're gonna let this rest for 2 to 4 hours. I'll probably let it go for 2 hours, then preheat the oven at as high as it can go, 500 degrees, and then let this rest another hour while that heats up. Has been resting for 2 hours. You can leave it for another hour before preheating the oven, but this looks good, nice and airy. I'm going to preheat the oven at 500 degrees, and that will preheat for an hour before I score the dough and put it in.
The dough has finished proving and the oven has finished preheating. It's been another hour. So the next step is to bake. What I'm going to do first is peel off your cling wrap. You don't need that, you can save it. And then we need to slash our dough. So I'm going to sprinkle the top with flour. And then gently whip it on. Make sure you don't deflate the dough at all. It's really fragile right now. I'm taking a bread lame, which has a very sharp blade on the end. You can also use a bread knife that has a serrated edge that's really sharp. Those are the 2 best things to use when you're cutting your dough. You can do any kind of pattern that you want. 2 on the sides or across the center. I think I'm going to do across the center. You can get really fancy, do a decoration. Make sure you get a good amount of depth in it, maybe about 1 inch or so. This is going to allow the bread to expand in the oven, and then it creates some beautiful shape. I might do some little mini slits here. Patterns. If it's not quite deep enough, you can go back in
do a little bit of a bigger cut. This looks good. What I have here is also my enameled Dutch oven, and I like to use these because it comes with a lid and that lets it steam, so you don't have to be like spraying your dough or your oven or having misters or anything in the oven. Well, it does give a chance to steam itself within the pot. So I'm just gonna lift up this parchment paper, stick it right in with the parchment paper. If there's any excess hanging out that might burn, I just kind of tear it off the sides. And then I'm going to put the lid on and put it in the oven. It will depend on your oven how long to keep the top on, but you want to keep it on until it's done its initial rise in steam in the oven. And then what we're gonna do is take the top back off. But before I put this in, reduce the heat on your oven. If it's at 500, reduce it to 475. Then when we take the lid off in about 25 minutes, I'd say, reduce it again to 435. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'll check on it in about 20 to 25 minutes to see how much time we need.
Okay, it's been 20 minutes, so I'm just gonna peek to see how it looks. Looks amazing. I think ooh, it's hot. I think I am gonna take the lid off now, because you see how it has these little kind of peaks, crusty peaks right here. Looks like it's done rising. So I'm going to put it back in so that it can brown, and I'm going to reduce the temperature over here to 435. All right, it's been 15 minutes. Bread is looking pretty good, and I'm gonna keep it in for 5 more minutes. I think 5 to 10 minutes, get it a little bit darker. Okay, it's been about 25 minutes and it's ready. Okay, being very careful, you can pull it out, your container. The bottom should be nicely brown, maybe a little dark, fine, it's gonna be really good. Let it rest for at least an hour before you eat it, before you bite into it, because that gives it time to cook internally. And that's going to be it. Thanks, bye. You can't do that on me. Is this how actors feel?
Yep.